listed up some colleagues, but of course this is a project of many other ones, and we're working together to try to tackle this virus. So first of all, why CT? I think you mentioned it already. CT is fast, it's sensitive in detecting COVID, and in this way we try to protect the people in the hospital. We try to fast make a choice between COVID or non-COVID patients. And I think certainly in the moment the disease was really endemic, this was important to try to early detect those patients. And if you have to wait for the PCR, it takes 6 to 12 hours. And at that moment, patients are in between. And we'd like to know, certainly for the critical ill patients, is this COVID or not? So CT is sensitive and it's fast. CT can be specific, but this is a big problem. I think in endemic moments, it's quite specific. And if you have an experienced radiologist, it's also quite specific. But there we need to do something to make it more specific. And I think AI can help us there. CT can also be quantitative and try to have an idea about disease burden. And PCR is only yes or no. But of course, PCR is really specific. It's looking for the RNA of the virus. So I think CT has its advantages and has its disadvantages. And I'd like to show you some images. On the left, you see a normal CT, a normal lungs. And in the normal lungs, you have some blood vessels, those white dots you see. And this is pathological, and you see the typical signs of COVID, where I will go into depth a little bit more now. So typical signs of COVID are ground glass opacities, crazy paving, and consolidation. Those three are the most typical ones. You have some other ones, so you have also the subpleural lines and some other, and also at the end, when the patient is curing, you see often if the disease was really hard hitting the patient, you see fibrosis and scar lesions. And I will go into depth in those three dominant patterns now. So one of the most dominant pattern is the ground glass. The ground glass are those white zones you see here in the lung, often peripheric, patchy, and you see it here. Those zones are making the lungs a little bit more wide on the image, but still you see the vessels going through those pathological zones. You can recognize the vessels really well, and so it's a little bit higher density, but not completely obscuring the rest of the lungs. This is what we call ground glass. It's active inflammation in the lungs. And then the other pattern on the other side, it's consolidation. If you get consolidation, all the airspace is filled up, and you see there's nearly no airspace anymore in the lungs. You just see the bronchi, the airways, which you can still detect, but all the rest becomes white and filled up with inflammatory cells, with liquids, and with all other proteins and things like that. So this is a complete consolidation. And then in between, you have the crazy paving, where you see some zones which are white and some zones which are more dense. And this is what we call crazy paving. And those three patterns are the main patterns we see in COVID disease. This is a typical viral pattern, what we see also in other viral diseases. This is a typical pneumonia pattern, what we see often in bacterial lung diseases. And the pattern in between is more typical for this COVID disease. And all three, if you see all three and you see the evolution of all three, often early this sign, then going to this sign, and then ending up with consolidation and then scarring. This is a typical evolution of a scored CT scan, of a COVID CT scan. And then I will show you some examples. This is an example, 85-year-old male, 58-year-old male. And you see here small dots, and you see here small little ground glass opacity, which is also seen there. And it's really not that clear. This was day 3 after onset of the symptoms. And then the patient got a new CT scan on day 13 of onset of the symptoms. And at that day, he was already without symptoms. But you still see more enhanced ground glass opacities in the lungs, and some maybe starting some small scar lesions. And this is at day 20, and you see the density of the ground glass opacity is slowly disappearing. And the first lesions you saw here and there, they disappeared here now clearly, nearly completely. So this is an evolution, and this is a quite long evolution. The patient had only 7 days symptoms, and still 2 weeks after disappearing of the symptoms, you still see the lung lesions which stay there, and probably even with minor symptoms, you see that the lung are hit really hard by this virus. And this is a more complicated situation. The patient was admitted to the hospital on day 4, and on day 4 you see already the ground glass opacities, you see some parts of consolidation, you see a little bit crazy paving. So at day 4, this patient was already quite ill and had an enormous lung involvement due to the disease. He went to intensive care on day 6, so 2 days after hospital admission. And then you see the evolution on intensive care. This was on day 6, and this is on day 40. So the patient stayed 40 days on intensive care, and luckily for him, he survived, but probably he will have some scar lesions, and this is something we have to tackle and maybe try to find something to provide this scarring to those patients, and really good follow-up is needed. This is another patient, a male of 69 years old. He came into the hospital and lung disease seemed quite okay. So he had here some ground glass opacities, maybe some consolidation. And the day afterwards, he really deteriorated. He went really well, so oxygenation dropped. And you see that the consolidation is here going on. This is consolidation. This is a little bit between ground glass and consolidation. And this was a contrast announced CT because we thought due to this really fast deterioration and oxygen problem, maybe he has had some pulmonary emboli, some clots in the vessels. There were no clots seen on this CT scan, and we did the double energy CT. And on double energy CT, you can measure the iodine load, so the contrast going into the tissue. And then you see in this zone where you had the ground glass, that iodine coming in is really low. Normally it should be between 17 and 20. In this zone, iodine level is going high because this is inflammation. But probably in this region here, all small vessels are occluded and we can't see it microscopically, but we know that iodine is not going to that tissue. So that patient died 2 days later due to organ failure. And we have also the autopsy images of that patient. And then you see nice filling up of the alveoli. You see the clots in the small and medium-sized vessels. So this was probably the course of his fast deterioration. You see hyaline membranes, and you see also some inflammatory macrophage cells going into the alveoli, so into the airspace in the lungs. And then there were parts of the lungs which were completely distracted. No alveoli anymore, so the lung is completely distracted. And these parts, if ever the patient would have survived, would be scarring lesions, and this lung tissue is completely damaged. And then I have some examples of patients coming in, like this one, 61 years old, coming into the hospital on day 5 after onset of the system of the disease. You see again ground glass. You see again the opacification and starting consolidation there, ground glass. Ground glass was the main pattern in this patient. And these are the images from ICOMETRIX. And there you see a really nice quantification. And you see also really nice specific detection of ground glass, of consolidation, and of crazy paving. And this patient had mainly ground glass, so lungs were involved for 70%, and the main involvement was ground glass. And this patient left the hospital after 29 days. Another example, the same patient again, and you see here the ground glass opacities. The image taken on intensive care on day 15, which shows more consolidation. And then when he was nearly leaving the hospital on day 23, you see a little bit of scarring and some small consolidation left and less ground glass. And then another patient, 71-year-old, admitted to the hospital 3 days after onset of the system of the disease. And you see really high burden of the disease, a lot of consolidation, some crazy paving, and maybe still a little bit ground glass. And when you see to the calculation from the AI system shows 32% of the lungs is completely involved. And the main problem is the consolidation. And this patient also died because of the important lung involvement and respiration problems and organ failure after 7 days of admission. So I like to conclude, why do we need as radiologists AI in COVID? I think one of the first things we would like to have immediately is quantification. And I think the AI system shows that quantification is already possible. Estimate the lung damage in terms of percent, because this is really difficult for a radiologist if he's only looking to the stack of images. And another thing why we need quantification is to decide about hospital admission, to decide about severity of the disease, and about follow-up. Together with the clinical systems, we can direct the patient to a treatment path and to a follow-up path. And then the next thing, as radiologists, we would like to have is to be more specific and to have a probability how the disease is, if the disease is in that patient, because you will see if it's not endemic anymore, and if COVID is dropping, you will again get other viral diseases. And then for an experienced radiologist, it would be probably possible to recognize the difference between COVID and other viral diseases, but if it's not endemic, it's still not evident. So if the AI system helps us to decide about COVID or other diseases, it would be really nice. And also detect COVID in this non-endemic periods is really important. And I hope, and I'm quite sure, that the system, if we go further in development, will be able to do this. And then the third thing why we need this AI is to go in follow-up, to compare the different scans and the evolution over time, and to decide about treatment, to try to tackle these scar lesions and try to tackle this lung damage. And I think early detection need other treatments is important to go to treat them for their fibrosis and to avoid permanent lung damage. So this was a little bit my radiological view. I will give the word again to our chairman, Hans, please. Can you take over?
Okay, thank you, Johan, for your contribution. I would like to give the floor to Dirk Smeets from ICOMETRIX, who will, of course, from the point of view of ICOMETRIX, will bring his story. Thank you, Dirk.
Okay, thank you for this introduction, Hans, and also for this very nice introduction by Professor De Mey, who gave a really good overview of how COVID is manifesting in the CT images. I would like to continue on how we, the ICOVID consortium, have tried to implement an AI solution that could contribute to the possible detection and classification of COVID patients. I think this presentation fits very nicely in the scope of this webinar series, because it's an AI solution that is offered pro bono, so it's for the common good, one could say. So going back to the conclusion of Professor De Mey, who thought that there is important roles for AI on the diagnostic support, on the risk assessment, and also on the follow-up. But if we focus on the first two, they can be translated into a technological challenge. So the medical need for a diagnostic support, which is to increase the sensitivity and the specificity of the CT imaging with AI, can be translated in the technological problem of image classification, which could be performed by artificial intelligence. And there, the role of the AI algorithm is on classifying the image, the CT image, as a COVID or as a non-COVID image, or even assign a probability to each of the images. You can see on the bottom left of the slide, it is also possible with some techniques to also provide heat maps to show on which basis the algorithm makes the decision. So for example, you can see there some heat maps that show why this could be a COVID patient. The second clinical challenge is to have a better risk assessment. And I think there AI can help in supporting the severity scoring of the CT scan. And this clinical question can be translated into a technological challenge, which is the segmentation of the image. This means that the AI algorithm should be trained to delineate COVID-associated abnormalities within the CT image. If we look a little bit into the differences in architecture and examples and training between those two challenges, these approaches, we see that the image classification is typically performed by deep neural networks with many layers. For example, the ResNet-50 is a network that has been already applied in the COVID scenario where 50 layers are used, whereas for image segmentation, mostly units are used. The training is also different where in image classification, there is a label on the image or on the slice, because an image consists of multiple slices, multiple two-dimensional images form a three-dimensional image. And one could label either the whole image or the slice, whereas for the image segmentation problem, it is important to delineate the structures that you want the AI algorithm to be segmented. Both technological problems have their own challenges. For the classification, it is very important to be sufficiently specific for COVID. You don't want to train the algorithm on any abnormality that is seen in the image. So for that reason, you need sufficient cases of patients that do not have COVID, but have similar abnormalities than seen in COVID. For example, community-acquired pneumonias, or bacterial pneumonias, or other lung diseases that have patterns that can also be seen in COVID. For image segmentation, I think the main challenge is to be sufficient consistent between the annotations. It takes a long time to annotate a scan because you need to see it as a three-dimensional scan, which has many slices, up to 300-400 slices. So it can take a long time to do the segmentation, the manual segmentation of one. So it's very important to keep consistency there. So from that perspective, within the ICOVID consortium, which is consisting of different academic centers, like the University of Brussels, also the University Hospital of Brussels, and other universities, together with also some companies like we at ICOMETRIX. We have been working on developing a software, and we have called that icolung, which at this moment does the segmentation of the images. And as you remember from my previous slides, this is a technological solution that can help in the risk stratification, which helps the radiologist and the treating physicians. So looking at the different steps and the technology used, it starts from a non-contrast chest CT scan, and then the lungs are segmented first. So we first look at the tissue that is within the lung window. And we also subdivide the lungs in 6 compartments. These are arbitrary compartments, but we do that to give an idea on the distribution of the abnormalities that are found by the algorithm. And this is the third step. So in the third step, we do a multi-class lesion segmentation. This is also done by a CNN, a UNet in this case, to do the segmentation of the ground glass opacities, the crazy paving patterns, and the consolidation. And if you recall back the the presentation of Professor De Mey, these were the three main patterns seen in the in COVID patients. And finally, this is all put into a quantitative report that can then be sent back into the hospital. Zooming in a little bit on the quantitative report, it contains some basic information on the patient, also some status on the quality, some visual results where you see the ground glass opacities in yellow, the consolidations in red, and the crazy paving patterns in purple. And then finally, the quantitative results, as you have also seen in the presentation of Professor De Mey. This is done by an integration into the hospital setting. So images can be sent directly from the PACS or the scanner to the analysis server, which is in the cloud. And the results are sent back to the workstations, to the PACS, so the radiologist can take them into account when writing the radiological report. So currently, we can be quite happy with where we are, I think. We have, with this AI, been able to install the software in over 50 hospitals. About 10,000 patients have been already analyzed with the software. So hopefully this could also help a little bit the risk stratification in clinical routine. Of course, when bringing software into a clinical routine, it's much more than designing and developing the AI algorithm. If you have this algorithm, you need to properly validate it and also write a dossier for regulatory approval. In Europe, this is called the CE marking, and there you send this dossier to the notified body, that these are companies that are appointed by the government to check medical device companies for the devices put into the market. And this is also the same holds for the United States, where the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is taking an eye on the medical devices that come to the market. And there's even more challenges in this particular case, because the images are also sent to the cloud. And this is done in what is called a pseudonymized form. That means that the images, there is no patient identifiable any information anymore in the cloud, but there is the possibility to re-identify that particular scan. Of course, this is needed, otherwise the results cannot be used in clinical routine setting. But this means that there is also a need to be compliant with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the European regulation on data privacy. And it asks to do a data privacy impact assessment where you compare the benefits of the solution against the potential privacy risk. And this is an exercise that we have done, and we have also sent to the GBA, which is the Data Privacy Commission in Belgium, to get their opinion on. So we not only have the GDPR in Europe, we have also similar legislations in the rest of the world. For example, there is the HIPAA law in the US. It's a bit less strict than the GDPR, but also there it's important to take security measures and to have also legal control on the processing of the images. I'm just mentioning this because I think it's important for you as people working in the field of AI, that if you apply AI in a clinical, in a medical context, there are some other aspects to take also care of, like the medical device regulations and the privacy regulations. Just a last final slide from my side to also show that we have also a big advantage of offering it as a cloud solution, because then we can do regular updates, because the updates are in the cloud that we can control ourselves as a consortium. This gives an idea on the evolution of the AI solution, icolung. where we started with a 2D binary segmentation. So this is a problem where we segment the abnormalities from normal appearing lung tissue. And this is done with a 2D network. That means it's done slice by slice. That's also what you can see if you look at the right image in the left report. You can see that if you look at in that image, that you can see that there is some that the segmentation is not 100% consistent over the different slices. It is much better when going to a 3D network that's seen in the middle, and also a multi-class network, which allows to distinguish between the different important types, as Professor De Mey outlined earlier. And then on the right, you can see also that completely on the bottom right, there is a bar that shows the COVID probability. But this is also something that the team is working on to try to also classify the image, giving a probability on whether the patient is a COVID patient or not. And as put in the final conclusion slide of Professor De Mey, this is an important help, especially in the future when the number of COVID patients will likely decrease further. And it's important to detect them early on when they are coming in the hospital and are being scanned under CT scan in this case. So with that, I would like to thank you all for listening to the story of the ICOVID project, a very nice collaborative project. I have just shown some major participants of this project. In total, there are over 50 participants in the project, so I could not list them all. But I want to especially thank the VUB. In this case, particularly Professor Vandemeulebroucke, who was contributing a lot in the technology development, and also the University Hospital of Brussels, where the head of radiology, Professor De Mey, also helped us a lot in getting the right insights to tackle the right problems, because it's always a challenge if you're a researcher in AI to translate the clinical question in the right technological question. Other hospitals, like the university hospitals in Antwerp and Leuven, Liège, they have also contributed a lot. And also other universities like the University of Leuven have been working on this project. So with that, I would like to give the word back to our chairman, Hans. And I thank you once again for this opportunity to present our ICOVID initiative.
Thank you very much, Dirk, and a nice bridge also to our last speaker, so to speak. So I hand the mic to Jef, who will indeed tell us a little bit more about the specific research challenges that he and his team encountered the past 10 weeks when contributed to the project.
Try to show is what we try to do behind the scenes in developing these algorithms. I will focus first more on the multi-class segmentation, for which we already have quite good results. And then I'll take some time to discuss the ongoing work, which includes the classification. I'll also try to stand still a bit at the challenges that we faced while developing this in a crisis, because I think it's interesting for future work to consider this. So first, multi-class segmentation. There are already a lot of images shown, but I'll go through them again. This is a subsampled image of a CT, and as I scroll through this image, we see the patterns appearing, so it's inherently a 3D image. And what we want is that we identify those patterns by closely delineating them, but also that we characterize, that we know which finding is which, and that's the colors in this image. And we want to do that completely automatically, so without any manual intervention. And we want that to be robust, and it has to work for different hospitals, different CT images. And we used supervised methods, and that means that you have to get manual annotations. And that turned out to be quite a challenge in these circumstances. To give you an idea, like I showed, CT images are a collection of 2D slices. And we will typically scan at high resolution at our institute, so approximately 500 slices covering the lungs, could be less. And then you have already quite a lot of data just for one scan that could go up to 2 gigabytes. So we quickly realized, because of the lockdown, that if we wanted to gather manual annotations, that means radiologists delineating the lesions, that we needed a cloud-based platform, because we didn't want to transfer gigabytes of data, and we would need to reach the radiologists anywhere. They were not all at the hospital, they were also at home. We needed a software that was suited for medical formats, so we wanted them in 3D. We also deal with specific file formats in medical imaging. And then 3D annotations, I already mentioned, 500 slides. That means that if you want to annotate one patient, you would have to annotate 500 images. So you need some help with that. You need interactive segmentation tools that help you propagate those in 3D, but still allow you to do manual correction. And last point is, you want that to be easy, because you do not have the time or the possibility to train your radiologists for this specific software. And so we set out to look for a software platform to do that, and that was not easy. So if I list all of these criteria, and I've added one column based on the price or the free availability of the software, you see that actually none of them really fit the bill. Luckily, during the crisis, an unexpected advantage was that all these platforms were offered free to us. So we were able to test them in this setting. But you see that typical medical software, which is quite powerful, however, is often not cloud-based. So you would have to install and transfer data. And it's typically not easy to use. It's more engineering tools that require really experience. On the other hand, we see some commercial software that is made for annotation, but it was not always suited for medical data, or it didn't have powerful 3D tools. We ended up choosing two approaches. I'll first talk about MD.ai, and then a combination of two softwares that we used that were provided by Materialize. So MD.ai, I think, is the closest that you can get to a real medical annotation software. It's very nicely made. You can make any type of label you want, different forms. And it works quite well for 2D. What we unfortunately saw was that it turned out to be very time consuming for 3D. We ended up doing 100 3D images. That was approximately 10,000 images that were annotated. I recorded about 500 hours of annotation time, so it was excessive. We were lucky to get the help of a lot of radiologists from around the world, actually, who volunteered based on a call that Dirk Smeets and ICOMETRIX issued. And so we got a lot of help, but still 100 images is nice to get started, but it's not enough. So we were extensively looking at other alternatives and decided to go to a different approach where we had different stages. So images were still collected at ICOMETRIX, but we then decided to do pre-segmentations using a specialized segmentation software, which is called Mimics. People were annotating, they had experience in segmentation, but they were not medically trained. We then sent the pre-segmentations to doctors, radiologists, via a simplified interface who could then make annotations on that. And the images were sent back for corrections. And hopefully you would only have to do that once. In some cases, you needed more iterations to get to the final segmentation. This is still work in progress. I'm showing some screens here of, on the left, the more advanced software where you have a lot of possibilities. And on the right, the simplified interface that allows inspection of the findings. So it's still work in progress. We're doing another 100 3D scans, And in this case, we're getting really help from the company because they are dedicating segmentation engineers. I don't think outside of a crisis setting, you would get that offered for free. And then let's talk a bit about the methods that we did. So just, I don't want to go too big into detail, but I do want to show you a bit what we've tried. So this is the overall approach. The CT image comes in. We then want to extract the lung to facilitate the problem. And then we want to detect all lesions within the lung. And then we do some post-processing in the end, typically. Now, first step sounds easy. Lung and then also lobe segmentation. These methods exist. You can even find them online. But we quickly saw that they were insufficient for COVID-19 patients. Some patients have such severe lesions that we had to retrain all these networks specifically on COVID-19 because normal approaches did not work. I'll try to go in a bit more into what we did. So this is some examples of what we did for lung and lobe segmentation. We're still improving that by gathering more manual annotations of lungs and lobes, and we use deep medic, which is a known deep neural network, convolutional network. And then we started off by doing binary segmentation. That was the first iteration of the icolung product. We looked both at 2D and 3D units. We would normally not work in 2D for these medical images. We would prefer always 3D. But in this case, we saw that because of the many slices available in 2D, 2D methods did have an advantage in getting good results quicker with low amounts of data. And we also saw that there was a complementarity between the 2D and the 3D networks that could be exploited. And I'll come back to that later. Here are some intermediate results on the binary segmentation. So those are two patients where in each time I'm showing in one row the ground truth and then the prediction. And the top patient is a patient where we consider the segmentation to be quite good. We get a DIE score of 84%. In this case, that's probably as good as you can get considering the quality of the annotations and the shape of the lesions. On the bottom, you see a patient with few lesions, and you see that in some cases, in some slices, our prediction missed one of the two lesions, or on the other one, it over-segmented the part. And you can see also how drastically this influenced the score. Now you're at 20%. That's not something that you would want to use in practice, but I do think it shows how hard the problem actually is, and especially in the case of quite subtle lesions that you would have to detect. So we applied more methods. I'm only showing you a couple of them because actually it's quite impressive. We were over 20 full-time researchers on this. And so I think there are more than 20 networks that were implemented. But we decided to work to continue on the binary segmentation and refine that to a multi-class segmentation. So that's what's shown here. And first the lung segmentation, then binary segmentation, and that mask is used to then identify patterns. The biggest challenge there, as Johan mentioned, is that ground glass opacities, cravey paving, and consolidation constitute the main patterns that we observe. But if you can see in the image on the left as well, let's say that the patterns are a bit mixed. There is not a clear line where one pattern stops and another one. And if you would let a radiologist annotate this image, you probably, or several radiologists, you would get different answers. And we've tried to illustrate that also here with the color code, where the prediction of one pattern is either red, green, or blue, but in regions you can get overlap. And you see that there is, let's say, a continuous evolution from one pattern to another. And that is probably closer to reality than the actual ground truth that we got, where, of course, an annotator has to make a choice on where one pattern stops and another begins. And that's quite challenging, especially in evaluation, to consider how good is your multi-class segmentation. These are some of the results. We did extensive testing, repeated our models, training and testing several times. Every column here denotes a different approach for the segmentation. I think these are results for the binary segmentation, where you see that there's a 2D approach and then 2 other approaches. And we also saw actually that we were able to get better results if we just made an ensemble model. That is, we combined different models, and actually this outperformed any of the other approaches. And that's a typical case where you are still facing, let's say, insufficient data. Data would have probably improved the results as well, data accompanied by annotations. But in this case, we were able to boost our performance by averaging the models that were developed. I would like to now mention a bit of stuff that's still ongoing. I forgot to mention this before, but all of this is, of course, a collaboration with the technical partners of this consortium, and that's mainly ICOMETRIX, the people at KU Leuven, the team at VUB, and then King's College in London. So what we see now, the shortcomings of our current approach, is that we still miss some very subtle lesions. Johan showed some examples in the beginning. This could be asymptomatic or symptomatic patients, and they are difficult to detect by a radiologist, but also by our algorithms. And for this specific case, we are considering 2 other approaches, where basically we are combining networks. In the first case, you would have some kind of region proposal, where we first identify the region where a lesion could be, and then afterwards a classification and segmentation network. On the other hand, we're using adversarial networks that combine a segmenter and a discriminator to see if we can boost the sensitivity for these subtle lesions. The final goal is, of course, that we want to go towards diagnosis. Can CT be used as a diagnostic tool? And I want to be clear about this, that everything that we did up to now, the detection and the segmentation, was in fact not COVID-19 specific. The goal was to detect all lesions in the lung. And we did, of course, also identify patterns which were suggestive of COVID-19. If we want to go towards using CT as a diagnostic tool, we would have to improve specificity. And that's a hard challenge, because we know from literature and from our colleagues, doctors, that none of the patterns are actually specific to COVID-19. They appear in other pathologies. The best their knowledge up to now suggests is that the presence of specific patterns, the shape, the location, and the distribution seems to be the most suggestive for COVID-19. I've given an example here where this is the lungs of a COVID-19 patient, and on the bottom of a pneumonia patient. And you could see that they bear quite some resemblance. The approach that we are trying to take there is to combine our multi-class lesion segmentation with the lung images, and to therefore raise attention to the distribution of the lesions throughout the lung. We do that with a gating layer over here, and hopefully get better results for COVID and non-COVID classification. This network is then also hopefully going to give us more insight into what allows us to distinguish a COVID from a non-COVID patient. And we do that using explainability methods. I've tried to illustrate that simply here, but if you make a network that constitutes, let's say, a cat detector, it allows you to say whether there's a cat in the picture or not. You can reverse that network and actually highlight the features, the locations that were taken from the image that led to the decision, yes, this is a cat. And we're doing something similar, unfortunately, for a network that's a lot more complicated, so it's a bit harder. But we are hoping to get to these heat maps that allow us to say which features, which patterns actually led to COVID-19 classification. I'd like to close with some concluding messages. I was very happy to participate in this collaboration, and I have to say I'm truly amazed what has been achieved in a short time. I think we were many people but also the willingness from all parties to collaborate has made a very big difference. Looking back at our challenges, considering that we had a lot of collaborators and actually an abundance of data, thousands of patients entering in a couple of weeks, the main bottleneck for the development turned out to be efficient tools for ground truth generation. And specifically, I'm talking about collaborative tools that allow us to efficiently interact with the physicians in the hospital at different locations. And what we saw, and which has been described in literature before as well, is that when that extensive ground truth is still lacking, it's better to have multiple models than just one, because the average of the models tends to outperform the others. So I think it's a risky endeavor to try to acknowledge everyone that contributed, but I'm taking the risk anyway, because I'm very grateful. And so this is just some people that have actively contributed to this technical project, and some institutes mentioned also on the bottom. There are many more that have helped behind the scenes. So thank you everyone for collaborating. I give the floor to Hans.
Okay, thank you very much, Jef, for this very crisp and very in-depth presentation as well. Maybe if there aren't immediate questions from the audience, you mentioned, and I will start with you, Jef, and maybe Dirk can jump into that first question. Maybe you said one of the challenges indeed was setting up this online collaborative platform to make sure that remote workers could collaborate on and especially I assume also the annotation, as you mentioned. And actually, this was a challenge, of course, for all people, I think, the last 10 weeks to actually do their job and to actually find the right platform to do so. But what I would wonder in this retrospect, also to make the calculations and the rendering of not only the images but also the algorithm and the learnings, was there a need in actually also having a high performance computing environment for these calculations using AI algorithms, or was that not the case because the number of patients and the images was not that high until now? Maybe Jef?
Well, I think the answer from me and from Dirk would maybe be slightly different. We had more infrastructure on campus, let's say, with dedicated machines and, of course, access to a cluster. We faced some connection issues, but let's say that people that were already actively working on deep learning quickly found their way how to do it from home. As we scaled up, now we are training networks on thousands of patients. We are seeing the limitations, and we are moving to cloud solutions because our current infrastructure is not able to handle this anymore. Specifically, maybe I didn't stress this. Let's say that the big challenge was also that we wanted to get results in a couple of weeks. So we did have to go to external private cloud infrastructure to make sure that we were able to handle the computational load.
Okay.
Yeah, and I can maybe pick in on that because from the ICOMETRIX point of view, we were a bit less involved in the training, which was mostly done at the VUB and at the KU Leuven. I also know that the Vlaamse Health Cluster was used there to contribute to the training of the networks. What was a challenge for us was to process all the images, because you need to think that in about 7 weeks, we have been able to process 10,000 images in a cloud environment. And for that, we use a public cloud provider, Amazon, a private, cloud provider, Amazon. They also contributed in the light of this crisis with some credits to give some additional computation power. And this allows us to run even hundreds of images simultaneously. And this is important to process the images that come from all the hospitals around the world.
Maybe a question also for Johan. A question from the audience. Do you think that we're mainly focusing, I think, in this project in actually do prevention, diagnosis, help thanks to the tools. But could it also now help that in actually determine what possible treatments the pneumonia specialist in the hospital should follow based on continuous analysis of patients thanks to CT?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's not a lot of treatments already proven at the moment for COVID, but some ideas are coming up. And I think to test those treatments and to have really good follow-up, I think this AI tool can be really a good help in that. Also, I think for the long-term follow-up and the treatment for the scars and the fibrosis, there I think AI can also give a good idea if treatment is working really well or treatment is not working. So I think indeed this is one of the goals for this AI system to test treatment and to have a close follow-up of treatment.
Which maybe brings me to the final question, and maybe it's also every three of you can answer, but I will start with Dirk. What are the long-term goals or ambitions with this project? Will it turn into a structural collaboration, structural program, structural or specific product? So maybe I would like to hear everyone's input on that for the long term. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because when we started this initiative, we were not thinking about the long term. What we were thinking about then was how can we be as soon as possible relevant, have some clinical impact in this crisis. And I think as Professor Vandemeulebroucke stressed, it was a great collaboration, and that led also to some fast results. Mm-hmm. And coming to the point of the long term, it's, I think, also because it was such a great collaboration, I hope we can make this a long-term initiative. Of course, there will be different questions on the research side and as on the clinical side. And I hope that we, and I speak for ICOMETRIX, can play a role to find that middle ground in bringing some interesting AI approaches into the clinical practice and help radiologists also further with the follow-up of patients and also with the diagnosis. And who knows, hopefully not with a second wave that might come later.
Maybe Jef, from a research perspective?
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things that we want to discover further. Mm-hmm. Something that we haven't mentioned yet, for which we also didn't collect data yet, is outcome prediction. Can we make predictions about patient outcome based on CT images and associated data? There is already ongoing research with the Department of Intensive Care. I think people from the AI lab, so also from this experience center, are already looking into their data and making predictions. And of course, what we would like to do is link initial data from diagnosis, so CT imaging, maybe with X-rays taken in the ICU and other physiological parameters. Can we make more predictions about progression or potentially which treatment works best? Mm-hmm. I am afraid, I don't want to be pessimistic, but this virus is here to stay for a while. So I think we're all best getting as quick as possible up to knowledge, up to date on what we can do about it. And I think this was a good start.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe I can add something. I think also the virus is there now and this is the first focus, but I'm dreaming of a system that can help us in interstitial lung disease. Interstitial lung disease is a disease of the lung with a high variability of causes. You have sarcoidosis, you have farmer's lungs, you have medication problems and lung damage due to that. So I'm dreaming of a system which can make a difference between those kinds of diseases. At this moment, as radiologists, we're just describing them. You see lines, you see nodules, you see ground glass, but there's no good clue to go for one or another, and this is really specialized radiology. So my dream is, if ever we have the time after this crisis, maybe we should go on and go for a a nice program that can detect special lung lesions and can help us to go to a diagnosis without biopsy.
Okay, and I really hope that all these partners that have found each other the past 10 weeks, that indeed this collaboration can last a little bit longer, indeed, to also a little bit fulfill that dream, Professor De Mey. So I would like to conclude here. I would like to also thank everyone to join this webinar. And as said earlier, you can actually also have a look or review this webinar later on the links that we will send to the participants. So once again, thank you very much to the presenters, and I wish you all a very nice day and a good weekend. Thank you very much and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.